When you look at Pokémon Red and Blue in their original context in 1996, they really were captivating and standout RPGs for their time. In an era where tons of phenomenal RPGs were coming out left and right, Pokémon Red and Blue stood out amongst them and captivated tons of fans. Are they perfect games? Not by a long shot. They weren't even the first games to start the monster collecting genre. Although, while games like Megami Tensei and Dragon Quest V did pioneer this idea, Pokémon really laid the foundation for a game centered around collecting and training monsters in a much cuter and more snappy format. Instead of negotiating and recruiting monsters through trial and error, now it's as easy as throwing a ball at them and catching them. Creating a party is simple and engaging, and trading with friends was utterly captivating. The concept of gathering gym badges and becoming the champion is a little tropey, but it's enough to motivate players to keep going. Over the years, Pokémon has evolved from a small, ambitious game with an interesting premise to the largest media franchise in the world. New generations of Pokémon games were released for each new generation of new fans, consistently tweaking and improving the formula in new ways and creating fresh new worlds to explore in. However, in recent years, the main series of games has seemed to stagnate a bit. The games consistently add new Pokémon to collect, but the narratives, worlds, and gameplay haven't seemed to evolve much. However, when Pokémon Legends Arceus was initially revealed during the Pokémon Presents in February of 2021, it showed some serious promise, albeit a little rough in its current state. Leading up until its release, it continued to look like an interesting new take on the series, although we were mostly kept in the dark for a while on what this game actually is. Pokémon Legends Arceus is a new, exciting blueprint for the Pokémon series moving forward, with a lot of great ideas, but a lot of room for improvement. Just a quick disclaimer before we go any further. This is going to be a spoiler-free video about Pokémon Legends Arceus. I may show some very light visual spoilers from a little bit further in the game if absolutely necessary, but if any visual spoilers are about to come up, I'll play this sound before they show up on screen so you can look away. As I said, these will be kept to an absolute minimum, and we won't be discussing any specific story spoilers or anything like that. So, without further ado, let's talk about Pokémon Legends Arceus, this new and interesting experience for the Pokémon series. The biggest differentiator for Pokémon Legends Arceus from the rest of the series is its world. Legends features a segmented open world with a variety of large, sprawling biomes to explore. The world isn't seamless, so it's closer to games like Monster Hunter and Mario Odyssey than Breath of the Wild or Final Fantasy XV. While it is a bummer that the map isn't completely open and interconnected, I do think that this allows the biomes to be more distinct and host different types of Pokémon within them. The concept of an open-world Pokémon game is so inherently captivating that I don't even think I really need to explain its appeal. Being able to walk around and watch Pokémon naturally live in the world rather than appear in a random encounter is so enticing. Pokémon Legends Arceus' concept and the world is super promising, but I do think that it needed to be polished a bit more. Look, the world isn't bad, it does its job, and it is genuinely fun to explore each biome and see what Pokémon exist in these areas. However, the worlds are just kind of empty. There's not a lot of interesting set pieces or interactivity in these vast open spaces. There are some trees and rocks and such that are pretty similar across different biomes, but there's not a whole lot of depth to these biomes or things that you can interact with beyond the Pokémon themselves and some shakeable trees and ore deposits. There are lots of materials spread out across the world, and the crafting system is implemented pretty well here and incentivizes players to gather materials and explore more of the world, even though you're constantly running out of space in your bag. I think that the worlds here are neat, but they really could have used more interactive parts and maybe some overworld puzzles that you can solve or some interesting platforming or climbing challenges that would break up some of the monotony within the world itself. However, it is very easy to get around in this game. Between the rideable Pokémon and fast travel, it is very easy to get from point A to point B in this game, which is really appreciated. The world in Pokémon Legends Arceus shows serious promise, but it sadly lacks polish and winds up feeling a bit too barren. However, the gameplay loop of actually finding, approaching, and catching Pokémon is so relentlessly charming that kept me utterly wrapped for hours. Seeing a Pokémon that you don't have yet out in the distance and slowly walking over to it, avoiding being seen, and catching it in real time is fantastic. This is so much quicker than engaging each Pokémon in a battle before you can even try to catch it, which really does wonders for the game's pacing. Not that the previous formula was objectively bad or anything, but this new take on catching Pokémon is just really refreshing, and I found it to be so much fun. I loved getting to new areas of each biome and visually being able to see new Pokémon in that area that I could catch. There are also these huge alpha Pokemon that are really strong and can wipe out your party if you aren't careful. However, if you can catch one, they'll be a great asset to your team. So I'd find myself very cautiously sneaking near one, throwing a berry to distract it, then running up and catching it when it was distracted to better my chances of catching it. If I got sloppy during any part of that process, I was at risk of engaging in a battle that I really didn't want to deal with. Stealthily catching these alpha Pokemon is genuinely some of the most fun that I've had in a Pokemon game in quite some time. And I think that this concept could be pushed even further in a future title with some intense stealth missions and more tools to use while trying to distract that Pokemon to catch it. One of the new additions in Legends is that you are completing research tasks for each Pokémon to complete its Pokédex entry. Since this game takes place in a time period where very little is known about Pokémon, it totally makes sense. I like the idea of researching Pokémon and their habits, especially in a game that really emphasizes interacting with these Pokémon in real time. However, the research tasks really miss the mark in their implementation. Typically, the research tasks are pretty darn similar for each Pokémon, and a lot of them boil down to catch this many of them, defeat this many of them, see this Pokemon use this move in battle, defeat this Pokemon with this type of move, feed this Pokemon a berry, and so on and so forth. As you can imagine, this is kind of mindless and easy to accomplish as long as you are catching and battling the Pokemon that you see. It's also really monotonous since you're just likely doing the same task for each Pokemon that you encounter. So you're gonna wind up just catching a couple, then battling a couple, and defeating them with super effective moves and calling it a day. I just think that this idea wasn't fully fleshed out, and this honestly speaks to a bigger issue within the world, and that's that the Pokemon don't really interact with each other or the world around them. They pretty much walk around, sit down, sometimes go to sleep, and rush at you if they notice you. They don't really interact with the set pieces in the world or with the other Pokemon in the area, and I think that this was a major missed opportunity to provide some really strong world building along with fleshing the research system out. It would be so much more interesting if you needed to observe Pokemon in their natural habitat as they interact with other Pokemon in the area. It would be super cool if you could even influence these interactions by throwing berries or other items, or even by sending in your own Pokemon to interact with the wild Pokemon. If players could provoke the Pokemon in Legends as they can in Pokemon Snap, I think it would be super fun and would break up a lot of the monotony that comes with the research task system in its current state. On the topic of quests, there are a lot of side quests that players can tackle as well, but unfortunately almost all of them are pretty much just retrieving a certain Pokemon, gathering materials, or showing a completed Pokédex entry. They're fine, they suffice, but I pretty much just ignored a lot of these side quests as I continued because most of them didn't really yield great rewards and were kind of monotonous to complete. The side quests, along with the research task system, are fine, but unfortunately just feel a bit rough. Pokémon Legends Arceus also changes up the battling system as well. So to engage in a battle with a wild Pokémon, you throw one of your Pokémon at it. If you catch them off guard, you can gain a major advantage in the fight, which is pretty cool and helps to speed up battles. The battles are quicker and snappier in general, and a lot of this comes down to the new tweaks to the battle system. Legends battle system places a very heavy emphasis on your Pokémon's speed, even more so than previous entries. In Legends, Pokémon can master moves by leveling up with that move equipped or by using Seeds of Mastery at the training grounds to master that move instantly. Once a move is mastered, you can then change the stance to Strong Style or Agile Style in battle. Strong Style provides more strength at the cost of speed, while Agile Style lowers the attack power but increases your speed. So, if your Pokémon is significantly quicker than its opponent, you can actually create opportunities to attack multiple times before they can act. I'm very mixed on these changes to the battle system. Personally, I've always found Pokémon's battle system to be a little bit too simple if I'm being fully honest. This may be because I really like RPGs and unique battle systems, so Pokémon's may seem a little too simplistic to me in comparison to other RPGs that I've played. But this really is an apples to oranges comparison, so don't take this as me saying that Pokémon's battle system is outright bad. However, I do like what Legends is trying to do here. Giving players the opportunity to strategize and try to outpace their opponent is really cool, but unfortunately this new battle system brings up balancing issues that weren't accounted for. Pokémon with slower attack speed are much less viable now in comparison to faster Pokémon, and it is really common for a Pokémon that's a couple of levels higher than you to get multiple turns right out of the gate. I like what Game Freak is getting at here, giving players the opportunity to make tactical decisions and trying to give the battles more depth than their typical rock, paper, scissors dynamic, but Legends battle system definitely needs more fine-tuning. Since Legends forgoes the traditional go beat the gyms and get the badges structure, you fight other trainers a lot less, and instead will be fighting actual actual bosses in the form of these nobles. These noble fights are really unique because they're actually action-oriented fights that involve the player themselves mostly instead of just your Pokemon. You have to throw these bombs at the frenzied noble until its health bar reaches 0, all while dodging attacks and firing when there's an opening. There are times where you can send in a Pokemon to fight and stun the boss, but it's not required and it's feasible to just beat this boss by yourself. I think that these fights are incredible and really provide a breath of fresh air from the standard boss and trainer fights from previous games. It's so cool that you now need to focus on avoiding attacks in real time instead of just paying attention to your health bar. These fights do make me wish that gyro controls were available as an option for aiming your throws, since it would make it easier to quickly aim at the boss during short windows, but that's just a nitpick, and I was able to beat the bosses in the game without much trouble using standard control stick aiming. The bosses in this game are so much fun though, and I really hope that we can see this idea continue to evolve in future entries. Most of the criticisms surrounding Pokemon Legends Arceus that I've seen are aimed at its visuals and its story. I won't harp on the visuals too much, since good graphics don't necessarily indicate a game's quality, and Pokemon games have never been big graphical showcases, but there certainly is room for improvement. I can look past the Dragon Quest VIII PS2 visuals, but the most distracting part about the visuals for me is the horrible amounts of pop-in and shaky textures that pervade the experience. You can't go very far into this game without noticing how short the draw distance is, or how often the textures in the world will glitch out. I mean, there are more intensive games on the Switch with better art direction that manage to have fewer problems with this than Legends Arceus, but my biggest problem is just that the game's visuals are poorly optimized. The story is definitely another big point of contention. Pokemon games usually don't have insanely complex and intricate stories, but there are games in the series that manage to create an interesting narrative about real-world issues like nature conservation. Pokemon Legends Arceus wants to do this too, with a story about two feuding clans who argue about their vision of Almighty Sinnoh. This is an interesting premise, but unfortunately its potential is not realized because these two spend a lot of time bickering back and forth over nothing, honestly. Most of their conversations boil down to, "You're late," "You're too obsessed with time," and so on for hours. Legends has a tendency to just hit you with walls of text for way too long, and it just really gets old, honestly. I've seen some people say that voice acting would have helped here, and while, yes, I totally think the voice acting would have helped the pacing of these cutscenes a lot, I just think that the story could have been paced better, and that these two constantly arguing about nothing really hurts the flow of the story. Beyond that, the story in Legends isn't actually the worst thing in the world. It balances some dark tones with some interesting character development for main characters like the Commander decently well, although not every character is treated to this level of development. Most of the characters that you encounter are pretty static in one note, sometimes even just being uncooperative for no good reason at all. The story in Legends Arceus is just kind of mediocre, to be honest, and any good ideas that it presents are sadly overshadowed by the slow pacing and some pretty bland characters. Pokemon Legends Arceus is a refreshingly exciting Pokemon game. It's really rough around its edges, and there is a lot of room for improvement, but the core of the experience is so engaging and relentlessly charming that it kept me utterly wrapped until the very end. Game Freak really has something special here, and with some fine-tuning and polish, there is an incredibly bright future ahead for Pokemon if this is the blueprint moving forward. If you haven't played Pokemon Legends Arceus yet and you've been on the fence, I recommend giving this game a shot. It's the most fun that I've had with a Pokemon game in a long time, and I'm excited to see where the series goes from here. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this review, please consider subscribing. It helps me out a ton, and you can always change your mind later. I really appreciate it, and I hope that you have a great rest of your day.